Welcome to the Newsmakers Podcast. I'm Billy Hollowell, and this is a show where we go behind the headlines every day to bring you an interview with a pastor, entertainer, politician, or other notable news figure. And this is a show, again, it's daily, but it's based on our weekly TV show, which is also called Newsmakers. You can watch it on the CBN News channel and also on our YouTube page. And on this show, every day, we dive deep. It's a little more longer form with one of the people who you will often see on our Newsmakers show or across the CBN News platforms. On today's Newsmakers, the founder of an organization that provides Bible education during the public school day said that a recent appearance he had on MSNBC and NBC was so bizarre that it felt like a Saturday Night Live skit. We are going to be joined in just a moment here by Joel Penton, founder of LifeWise Academy. We'll talk a little bit about what his organization does, but we'll also get into how biased and unfair he believes this NBC segment was. With no further ado, let's chat here with Joel Penton. So Joel, you were the subject of a very interesting NBC and MSNBC piece over the past week, and this particular piece focused on LifeWise Academy and the work that you're doing in public schools with public school kids during the school day. Let me word it that way. And you know, there are a lot of things that were said during the MSNBC story. I'll read a couple of them. There were serious concerns about a breach of the separation of church and state. There was a question as to whether or not LifeWise is running afoul of the First Amendment. At one point, your work was called distressing. What was it like for you to watch these segments, both the NBC piece and then the broader MSNBC piece? What was that like to see?
Well, the NBC piece was the nightly news piece. It was really interesting. The whole experience of having them come with all of their people and do such a long interview and spend all day and boil it down to 3 minutes and to see how things were framed and how it was kind of looked balanced, but it wasn't really balanced. That was fascinating. Like, I'd never been kind of inside the machine. I've had a million conversations about LifeWise. I've done a million interviews where people are just asking honest questions, you know, and then to do something like that was weird. But fine. The MSNBC piece, frankly, to me was hilarious. Like, it genuinely felt like an SNL skit because I know reality. Like, I know that we have a Bible education program with little kids. Like, we're teaching little kids the Bible. And in fact, when NBC came, they were there for the lesson on David and Goliath, like the most famous Bible story of all time. And that they would turn it into something that they find distressing. That was, I mean, it was funny.
Well, and really, just so people know, before we even go forward talking more about this, you know, what LifeWise does is during special periods of time, lunch, recess, perhaps a library period, not non-essential education time, and correct my wording on that if you need to, but kids can be voluntarily, if their parents choose, they can opt in and they can be bussed over to LifeWise events that happen at a church or a local community center, and they can learn about the Bible, and then they're brought back to school. So it happens during the school day, but it's not created by the school system. It's privately funded. That's essentially what you do, right?
That's correct. I mean, in the same way that a child will maybe have art class once a week and music class once a week and gym class a couple times a week, through our program, a public school student can have Bible class once per week. And yeah, it has to be off school property, privately funded, parent permitted. But the Supreme Court has ruled on this. There's state laws about it. It's little known. We think sadly, it's been under the radar. We're trying to popularize it, but it is the most black and white, clearly legal thing imaginable.
Right. And we've done videos on that. We can link out to those. People can learn more. They can hear you talk more about the legalities of it. It's completely legal. This seemed to shock MSNBC. Obviously, I mentioned some of the things at the top that were said, but one of the big elements that was very interesting in watching the segment, there was a real political fear. There was a discussion about blue islands in red states that could be swayed by LifeWise, that if you raise up all these Christian kids, essentially, when you read between the lines, that could have a political ramification. What was it like, that piece of it? Because you weren't sitting there when they were asking those kinds of questions. I don't think they did that after the fact. What was it like to hear them talk about the political fears they had?
Well, honestly, it felt Well, it was strange, and when I did the interview with NBC, it was very oriented toward the political. They kept drilling in. They wanted to talk about abortion. They wanted to talk about political things, and I kept saying repeatedly, we're not a political organization. We're teaching Bible stories to kids. And what's interesting to me is that as Christians, the Bible truth, that's the big category, and politics is just one small detail, right? Like life is so big, and to them it seems to be switched. It seems to be that the big category is these political agenda things, and the Bible is just this one, Bible studies is one little thing. And it was just so, and it honestly, it was like troubling to see, adults, Americans saying, we got to get rid of this Bible because it might affect these politics. And it's just like scary to hear.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, I will tell you this. I've seen a lot of segments. I haven't seen one quite like this, especially because we've covered you a lot. I've interviewed you a lot. I know what you guys are trying to do and what your mission is. I mean, they even went as far at one point as to note that ice cream or popcorn parties were being offered to try to get kids' friends to sign up. And it was presented in the middle of this as though that were some sort of danger, it felt like. I mean, they weren't saying that, but it was implicit almost in how they were presenting it. How did you not? I mean, when you hear that, it's like, well, yeah, they're trying to get their friends to join them and come to it. I mean, it just was so weird, right?
It was bizarre. That's when I felt like I was watching an SNL skit. On the NBC piece, like they had foreboding music and like this lighting and stuff around, like having popcorn. And I thought like I was taking crazy pills, because I thought, when was the last time you've even been to a gathering for kids that there wasn't like popcorn or pizza or snacks or something? It's almost as though we should not make our program attractive. We should not make it fun. We should not make it something that kids would want to come to. That's a double standard that is wild. I mean, if you think of any school club, including the school clubs, that would be questionable, like any school, they're going to have things like that. It's a gathering of people.
Yeah. And, one of the things about LifeWise, and I don't have the numbers in front of me, but you guys attract a lot of unchurched kids and families, right? Kids who maybe aren't going to church every week, their parents opt them in. In the particular school that was profiled by NBC, about half of the kids, 50% of the kids in the school, they're attending LifeWise. And I know in some schools it's even higher than that. That's really interesting. And I think it adds to this dynamic. There are so many kids participating. There was a point in the interview with you where that was brought up, and basically in the sense of, well, how does this make all the other kids who aren't going feel, right? And, you gave a good response to it, but that question of, oh my gosh, well, half the kids are going and they're wearing these really cool LifeWise shirts and all the other kids feel left out. What did you make of that line of questioning?
Again, it's one of these strange double standard things where in questions like that, it makes you really wonder or realize that the person you're talking to is just looking for a reason to shut this down, right? Because you would never apply that same logic anywhere else, because some kids join the band, and so they're carrying around an instrument every day, and other kids don't join the band, so they don't have an instrument. But you don't start saying, no one can join the band because not everybody joins the band. I mean, that is just so ridiculous. No one would say that out loud, but somehow it's being said about this Christian program. And you mentioned the numbers. I do think that it is the extreme numbers that is getting the attention. That's getting the attention on the positive side.
Yeah.
When people hear what's happening with LifeWise Academy, that our goal was 25 schools by 2025, and we're serving 300 schools across 12 states. When they hear that very regularly, more than 50% of the entire school will enroll, most people I talk to are unbelievably excited and optimistic to hear that. But yeah, there's a segment of people that hears that, and I guess they have a particular plan for our nation that I guess instills fear in them.
Yeah. And, there's another part of the interview where a parent was brought in who doesn't like LifeWise, is not a fan of it. They apparently have a child in one of the schools where LifeWise is, and they identified this parent as a Christian, but said that she would never take part, her kids would never take part in LifeWise, which again, it's optional. That's their right. But there was a point where the reporter asked, what do you think LifeWise is trying to do? And the response was very interesting. Influence, slant public schools. That was the response. And I thought, is that a bad thing? I mean, But when you heard that response, I was expecting something like really nefarious, maybe, or evil. And when I heard that, I thought, huh, what's your
Yeah,
take on that?
there's a lot of there was a like you. I thought, huh. For one, our goals are so clearly stated that we do want to influence kids. You know, we want to provide parents who want Bible education for their kids. We want to provide that for them, and so yeah, we're talking about the gospel. We're talking about character. We're talking about God. It's very transparent, and yeah, but to say slant schools, it just shows you maybe what is important to somebody or what you know there's a lot of things you could say about it. Obviously our goal is not to slant schools. I don't even know what that means, but
Right.
one might say, is it possible schools are already slanted in one particular direction? And so perhaps the goal would be to balance schools. But again, that's like the small category. The big category is the truth, the Bible, human hearts. That's what we care about, not politics and school policy.
Well, yeah, you go where people gather. The reality is the majority of children in America gather in public schools. That's where they are, right? And there are millions of kids in public schools, and you can have that debate about what the slanting means all day long. And I will say this coming from me, when you look at numbers and stats, and there are politicians, even Eric Adams, a liberal politician in New York City, the mayor of New York City, has said that we are experiencing what we're experiencing right now because we have moved away from values. We've moved away from God and culture. We're seeing people talk about this, and that move away from God and morality and values in the public schools has had a major impact within those communities. So, needless to say, here you have a solution. And I want to talk about the solution piece because I would imagine, I know that you have done research, you have numbers showing the impactful nature of LifeWise. I'd love to talk about some of those numbers. Did you share those stats with the reporter?
So yeah, I'm glad you asked. We shared them repeatedly. In fact, when we're talking with someone from a school, a parent, from someone from the general public, what they want to know is, what are the outcomes? What are the results? Especially if we're talking to someone who's not necessarily a Christian. And so they don't necessarily care about the gospel in the sense that Christians do. They want to know, what are the results? Are you just taking time out of the school day? And there's a third party independent study that shows when a school implements LifeWise, their attendance goes up. The New York Times just reported that chronic absenteeism is a real thing after COVID. And when LifeWise is introduced, attendance goes up by 7% on average, which is remarkable considering we don't even have kids for 7% of the time, which means there's a net increase in class time just by implementing LifeWise Academy. Also, in school suspensions drop, out of school suspensions drop. These are the things the public would want to know, which is why we shared them again repeatedly. It was left out of all of the NBC print piece, the NBC nightly news, the MSNBC, not a word of the results.
And if you're trying to be fair and impartial, that would be an important piece to include, right? Because even if they include all the other things, in opposition to what you're doing, when you have data that is showing that there are positives to having this program at a time where education is in crisis in America, you would expect that that would be shared. And so that is interesting to me because we've reported on your numbers at CBN and Faith, where months ago I wrote a number of stories on the numbers that you had shared with me at the time. These are numbers everybody should be looking at and paying attention to. So I want to conclude on a positive note because we've talked a lot about, this. You guys are doing crazy things, incredible things, crazy in a good way. You've got, as you said, 300 schools. Your goal was 25. What are some of the things you're seeing happen through LifeWise right now?
I mean, we're seeing life change. It's exactly what we anticipated, in the sense that we have always known, if we could find a way to unleash the word of God, right, that it doesn't return void. It changes hearts. And that's what we see on a daily basis. We're getting stories of kids that are coming to faith, asking to be baptized, families that are reconnecting to the church, schools that are being transformed, public school teachers that are saying, whatever you're doing over there at that LifeWise thing, please keep it up because I see the change in my students. So that is the exciting thing. And national news media can't take that away. Like when we are getting to share the Bible with kids, their lives are being changed, and that certainly makes it worth it.
Well, I appreciate you, all the work you do, and you coming on today, breaking it all down and responding to these reports. Crazy times we live in, but appreciate you today.
Yeah, appreciate you, Billy. Thanks for the opportunity.
That's all for today's Newsmakers podcast. Be sure to tune in for the next episode of the show, and also head over to the CBN News YouTube channel and the CBN News channel to watch Newsmakers every week. We'll see you soon.